Welcome to Charts Today. It's Thursday, the 4th of June, and today I'm going to do something a little bit different. I'm going to focus on long-term charts. I did an interview with Axel Rudolph at IG Index on Tuesday in London, and if you go to the videos page in our resources section, just scroll down a little bit and you can actually watch that video there. Axel's head of education at the Society of Technical Analysts, and it was a really good interview. He really knowledgeable, and we covered long-term charts, looking at cloud charts, and it just made me appreciate that so few people look at the longer term. So today I'm going to look exclusively at weekly charts. And so the key thing I want to do first of all is looking at the dollar. You can see here this is the dollar index on the weekly cloud. That's long term. I normally will fit between long term, medium term, and short term. Today I'm going to force myself just to stay with the long term. So here we can see we've got a downside target that's activated, the upside target not yet activated. So we are bearish on the dollar here. And that means that when we look at some of the other currencies, euro, that is looking a little bit stronger against the dollar. We're above the cloud and we've got an upside target. But to an all intents and purposes, the dollar is in a range. If we look at the Japanese yen, this is looking like dollar strength versus the yen breaking higher, weaker yen. We talk about that quite a lot when we look at the charts. And here we're looking at sterling, and we can see here that sterling is actually nudging new highs on the weekly chart on hopes of higher interest rates in the UK. So really quite key there. Looking at Bitcoin, we see really interesting that we had these big upside targets. This one here, not quite met. Weekly targets are unusual, and I do cover those in the presentations in that video section if you want to understand the weekly chart targets. But the interesting thing is we've moved below the cloud, we've fallen back below the cloud, we've come up to confirm our resistance on the lagging line, and it now looks like Bitcoin is set to make new lows. We're in a downtrend long term. We're in a downtrend medium term, but we have been in a downtrend long term ever since we fell through that 80,000 level. So that is really key. Looking at the Nasdaq, of course, the trend here on the weekly chart is very firmly up. In fact, we haven't had the lagging line below since 2022, so a good few years of strength there. The same for the S&P E-mini, the future, but effectively the US stock market. And the weekly cloud with big upside targets. We are seeing the Nasdaq down, the future down 1% today, but the reality is that trend, that long-term trend on that weekly chart, notice how we found support on the weekly cloud, just shows that. If we look at the UK market, we see here, we can see we're above the cloud here, waiting to see which way we break. Relatively weak because we've gone into that consolidation phase. And if we look at the DAX in Germany, we can see here actually on a long term we are still in an uptrend. So this is just what the long-term charts do tell us. Japan has been in an uptrend as well with upside targets, that weaker yen helping Japanese earnings, and that's quite key. The Sensex in India has been hit of late, and interestingly, we have moved below the cloud both on the price and the lagging line. So we have gone into a new long-term downtrend, having failed to break resistance, and we're waiting to see if we activate this big downside target. So things are not looking so good in India. And if we look at the Australian market, it is still in a bullish trend. We have got a downside target, but not activated. And we have got an activated upside target. Brent crude was one of the charts I talked about in the interview, and the scenarios that we'll see play out in the Middle East. But the interesting thing here, this is the weekly chart, remember. This is a long-term picture. It was looking bearish until the war started, and we are now elevated. We had an upside target on the weekly. We're now waiting to see out of this consolidation phase which way we break. And we can go to the long-term charts for cocoa, still bearish below the cloud. Coffee has gone into a long-term bear trend and has just recently made new lows. That's a big double top showing there on the weekly chart. You've got several years of data that you may not see on the daily chart. We can discount this upside target now. We're below the cloud, and that's the key point. is understanding we failed to make a new high, and now we're making a lower high. The Dow theory telling us. Sugar, this one has been a really clear chart. Bullish in 2020-21 all the way up to $27.50, and then we had a move below the cloud, downside targets, and that's where we're headed. We're below the cloud. Long term, sugar is bearish. Wheat, we have broken above the cloud on the long term chart, and on corn we can see the same thing. Grains breaking higher there, although we are testing that cloud. Now, gold was one of the charts we talked about in the interview as well, and since that time, in the last couple of days, we have activated this downside target. We are still bullish above the cloud, so gold could fall all the way back to 4,000 and still maintain that long-term bull trend, but the medium-term trend is bearish. Silver, similar picture. We've got downside target, we've got an upside target, a bit more mixed, but we are long-term still in a bull trend, even though the medium-term is not so good. US bond yields, here we've had a big move, big consolidation phase basically. The normality is move into the pattern, move out is the same. So we have got mixed targets, but we are still above the cloud, and so that favors the upside. Apple, what an amazing chart this is. Long-term chart, from 100 6 years ago to 300, just steady long-term chart. Amazon also. Most of these tech stocks are in long-term uptrends. Google, very strong, went into another gear when it broke in 2025. You may recall at Christmas on the LSEG masterclass, this was one of my top calls for 2026. Microsoft has suffered of late, and they did spend some temporary time below the cloud. We have managed to make a higher low than the previous low, which is good news for Microsoft. The lagging line back above the cloud, and on the daily chart we have moved back above the cloud, and there is a new upside target on the daily. Meta, we can see here, this has been really playing with the cloud as well, and we're waiting to see which way we break. Nvidia, long-term strong performance above the cloud. So went into another gear in 2022 when the price was at $25. Imagine that, it's gone up nearly tenfold. Tesla is above the cloud. And of course, there's a lot of euphoria around the SpaceX. I did have a question on YouTube, and I do put them in the comments. What was my view on the SpaceX IPO? Well, first of all, I'm a technical analyst, so without any chart data, I'm fairly useless. So I can't really comment on the IPO, but I must say, when that IPO happens on that first day, watching the 1 minute and the 60-minute charts will be absolutely fantastic. Watching that price action will just be zooming in micro. Can't wait to watch that, and we'll be watching it in real time and watching all the targets in real time as well. So it'll be really, really key. But the key point is, both that, Anthropic and ChatGPT, these trillion-dollar valuations, $2.5 trillion being sucked out of the market, will be very interesting to see how the market copes with it afterwards, after all that euphoria. Who can say? But we will be watching it very closely here on Charts Today. Now, looking at the list here, you can go to the long-term charts as well. Walmart, interestingly, lower high, lower low, but still a long-term uptrend. Caterpillar, look at that long-term uptrend. Upside targets on the weekly given and met. IBM fell heavily yesterday, but the interesting thing is that the lagging line, despite that big move, they're still in an uptrend, bullish above the cloud, so really quite key. If we go to some of the Nasdaq charts, we can just go and look at the strongest performance yesterday. That's Charter, long-term downtrend, making new lows. And if we go the other way, Western Digital, look at these. I mean, these charts are incredible. Intel, the chips are just ridiculous, really. I mean, we're just seeing massive upside targets. We've broken out, and so realistically, that's the situation. Last of all, a quick look at the UK market. Relx, look at that upside target, broke the cloud. Downside target met very, very quickly. Got a new upside target, but we're not yet above the cloud. That's it for today. Until tomorrow, happy charting. Bye for now.